Chair. Mr. Saint Amans, thank you very much as well for your time today. It's been extremely useful. You mentioned earlier on that the OECD hasn't got an analysis of the potential winners and losers of the implementation of the 15 action items specified in the report. Obviously, that's going to be of interest to every country involved. Can I ask, do you know of any organisation, be it a national government or a multilateral or indeed a private company, that has done an analysis of the winners and losers were the OECD recommendations to be implemented?
No. Except that one of the actions included in the action plan, which is action 11, is to deal with the impact and the spillover effects of the work we're doing. And I understand that the IMF is also willing to work in this area, which we very much welcome as a complementary analysis of this work. What we did in February is to gather some pieces of evidence. And we did find some in the analysis of the effective tax rate of some groups, some companies. We also did find some in the indicators of foreign direct investment. When you have the British Virgin Islands being one of the top 5 investors in China, in the Netherlands, in Russia, and in some other countries, it gives you a sense that something is happening. And we also concluded that even though we do not have a figure to indicate what would be the loss, we have elements which makes us think that something here is happening which jeopardizes the revenues of the member countries.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to loopholes in Ireland. One of the objectives of this subcommittee, and certainly why I believe it was set up, was so that we can identify the loopholes being exploited by multinationals relevant to the Irish law. And your point is very well made that these are multinational problems and should be solved internationally. The international taxation regime is obviously very complex. And can I ask you, is there a small number of Irish taxation laws that are being exploited to a large degree? So I imagine a full analysis might show hundreds of pieces of laws and subclauses, but are there one or two big loopholes that we could close down that are being used by the MNCs, by the multinational corporations?
I think that's a very good question. I would need to further understand the Irish system to provide you with the right answer. In other words, I'm not a specialist of the Irish tax system, nor I am of any of the systems, but rather of international tax rules. So I would be happy to get back to you on this. I understand from the schemes you find, and some of your colleagues earlier mentioned the issues of residence, and whether residence is given to some companies or not, depending on the level of activities they are having, is obviously something which has been used in the current environment. What I would like to draw your attention on is that you don't, I mean, it takes two to tango, as you say in English, and you need to always see the interaction with some other legislations in other countries. But I think the residence one is probably something which has been quite well used.
Thank you. If you or your team were willing to send us a document with your opinion, considered opinion in response to that question, I think it would be very useful. So, for example, if it was your opinion that 80% of the problem could be fixed through addressing 2 or 3 particular taxation laws in Ireland, I think that would be extremely interesting and useful.
If I understand your request, 80% of the problem, I'm not sure how you define the problem then. Is the problem the fact that Ireland doesn't tax what you think it should be taxing, or that the US US multinational is not taxed in the US when it would have been otherwise taxed in the US. But then if it would have been taxed otherwise in the US, wouldn't have it got the same result by using a Dutch company, which would be deemed residents in the Netherlands? So, you know, I mean, that's a complex issue, and that's why I'm a bit short in responding to you. I would be happy to look further at the different schemes, but defining the problem here is difficult because you have the international environment and the interaction of different legislations, which makes it probably more difficult to solve it unilaterally.
Thank you. Well, certainly I'd be very willing to be led by your definition of the problem. For what it's worth, my definition of the problem is two things. The first is multinational corporations not paying any tax to sovereign states, and therefore non-multinationals and citizens having to take up that burden instead. I think that's the first, that's the meta problem. I think then the micro problem is ensuring that so once the taxes are being collected, that those taxes are being collected in the jurisdiction where the value is created. So to me there are two parts to the challenge. So if you can come back with any thoughts, or you or your team, on what could be done in Ireland to address both of those issues, that would be extremely useful. Can I ask, I'd like to move on, if I can, to get your opinion on the OECD's taxation principle and the principle behind the CCCTB, the Common Consolidated Corporate Tax Base, which is an EU proposal, and one which I think is technically flawed, politically motivated, and should be resisted by this country and Europe in general. The principle, as you know, is that the taxation would be applied according to three things, which would be assets, labour and sales. The reason I have a huge issue with this is I believe if a microchip is manufactured in Ireland using IP developed in Ireland and it is sold in Germany, the German government should not derive any taxation benefit from that, obviously VAT if they want it. But my understanding reading your report is the OECD's principle is that corporate tax should be applied at the location of value creation. Is it therefore the case that your proposal for the international principles of corporation tax are contrary, at least in part, to the CCCTB proposal?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
The current rules that you find in Article 9 of the Model Tax Convention, both in the OECD and in the UN Model Tax Convention, provides for international transactions within a group to be priced at arm's length, which means as if the transactions had been concluded with third parties, independent parties. And that's, I mean, out of that, the result out of that is that the countries should tax the profit accruing in their jurisdiction, and in other words, it's the value creation that you have referred to. In my understanding, the CCCTB is about establishing a system of consolidated common base for corporate income tax with a number of criteria to allocate the right to tax. What you describe is right. I'm not sure I would draw the same conclusion that, and it depends on the selection of the criteria. Maybe the criteria would be defined to make sure that the taxation takes place where the profits accrue and where the value creation is made. And there are very interesting and fascinating debates there within the OECD membership, but also with non-OECD member countries like China or India on what the value creation means. The Chinese delegate not long ago indicated publicly that the sale of a German manufacturer car in China, the value creation is in China because the sale takes place in China, which means that it's a Chinese citizen, which gives the value by buying the car. So you know that you can have different interpretation, and clearly the Chinese one, as I described, is not the consensus one. So in other words, I would not drop to the conclusion that you've reached that they are in contradiction. That may be another way to approach it. What is for sure, and that would be my comment on the CCCTB, is that it would require a consensus on the criteria to share the profit, and this is something that I do not see happening outside of the European Union for a while. And a number of people on the NGO side are asking for unitary taxation, and we respond, sorry, we don't see this happening. I mean, I'm not even sure. I'm sorry, because I'm not sure it would be better, but I would be more than happy to examine, to try to understand and to consider. But I do not see this happening because there is no consensus on criteria, no possible consensus in the short, mid, and probably long term. And in the European Union, I have sympathy for the European Commission, my colleagues in the European Commission, which are pushing this, because it doesn't seem that there is consensus either there.
Thank you very much.